Is your paycheck not stretching as far these days? You're not alone. Canada's cost of living crisis has left many struggling to afford basic necessities. Housing, food, and transportation costs have risen steadily over the past few years, while incomes remain stagnant, creating an unbearable economic reality for countless Canadians. This squeeze on household budgets has far-reaching impacts, from rising debt levels to growing food insecurity. As prices continue their upward trajectory, more and more Canadians are being pushed to the financial brink. Let's take a closer look at the causes and impacts of Canada's deepening cost of living crisis. In this video, we'll highlight the causes, impacts, and role of government behind this crisis. You'll discover why this crisis runs much deeper than inflation or interest rates. But before we continue, we would like you guys to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell icon so you do not miss out on any amazing and entertaining content. Canadians are growing increasingly desperate about the cost of living. A viral TikTok video capturing this despair, showing a woman struggling despite having an education and full-time job. She makes under $40,000 per year, but still can't afford basic expenses like rent. Her video resonated widely, amassing over 5 million views. There are now dozens of similar videos emerging on TikTok and other platforms, with struggling Canadians candidly venting about their financial situations. A common theme is intense stress and worry over the rising costs of rent, food, gas, clothing, phone and internet bills, student loan payments, and more, with incomes failing to keep pace. Even those earning decent wages or salaries say they are barely scraping by paycheck to paycheck, often needing to use credit cards or loans to bridge cash flow gaps. Tales of the working poor abound as dreams of home ownership or starting families drift further out of reach for many. Some Canadians describe needing to work multiple jobs just to pay for their lifestyles, sacrificing personal health, relationships, and mental well-being in the process. Many worry that an unexpected expense could financially devastate them by maxing out their borrowing capacity. Numerous similar personal stories are emerging online. But this crisis extends far beyond social media anecdotes. Hard data confirms more Canadians are on the brink of financial ruin, over half on the brink of insolvency. A 2021 survey showed 53% of Canadians live $200 or less away from not being able to meet all of their monthly bills and debt obligations. This number includes the 30% who said they are already insolvent, with no money left over at the end of the month. Some have resorted to home equity lines of credit or reverse mortgages to free up cash flow. This simply kicks the can down the road since it goes straight back into keeping up with rising day-to-day costs rather than investments. But why is this happening so rapidly? Canadians cite rising household bills, food costs, and debt servicing as main sources of anxiety. With interest rates much higher over the past 18 months, debt repayments have shot up. Even more alarming, over one-third of households now lack enough income to cover current expenses. That figure has never been higher. Taking a closer look, we see inflation in Canada continuing to rise faster than income growth. Prices have soared on essentials like groceries, electricity, home heating fuel, and shelter. Food inflation has run over 14%. Outpacing wages by a wide margin. This creates a severe cost squeeze for many. Canadians have relied heavily on credit to bridge the shortfall. Household debt-to-income ratios set at an alarming 177% as of September 2022. With higher interest costs now piled on top, it becomes a precarious situation. Any kind of economic shock could cause consumers to radically slash discretionary spending, pushing Canada into a recession. That would initiate a vicious cycle of further job losses and even less ability to service debts. Despite these trends, Justin Trudeau's Liberal government thinks Canada's economy is doing just fine, and Canadians have never been better off. Yes, overall wage growth has outpaced headline inflation for now, but for most Canadians, real purchasing power has fallen substantially. Price increases for inelastic goods like groceries and energy carry an outsized impact compared to discretionary purchases. With pay failing to keep up on essentials, household budgets face tremendous pressure. Unemployment also looks much less rosy after accounting for reductions in labor force participation. Job gains this year lag well behind last year's pace as business sentiment wanes. Leading indicators suggest Canada will shed jobs in the months ahead rather than add them. So why is the government so oblivious about ordinary people suffering? When elected, the Liberals promised to strengthen the middle class. They recognized that globalization and technology, while beneficial overall, have squeezed median wages. Yet, after 8 years in power, the opposite has happened. Why? Upon taking office, the Liberals inherited a stagnant economy. Rather than implement tough reforms, they took the easy route, borrowing and spending at unprecedented rates. This debt-fueled fake growth boosted GDP statistics, but it provided no productivity gains to drive real wealth creation. It simply pulled forward demand via credit expansion. Now the debt party has ended. Interest costs have shot up. Consumers and government alike face intense budget strain. Those relying on debt to increase living standards or profit margins have reached an inflection point. Artificially inflated asset values and consumption patterns prove unsustainable without ultra-low rates. But the problems run deeper than even overzealous spending. Canada has become addicted to debt across the board to create the illusion of a thriving economy. During years of low rates, Canada used debt to mask our lack of real advancement. Growth came from borrowing, not productivity. They failed to innovate transformative new products, technologies, or services. Business investment stagnated right as other countries doubled down. Instead, they funneled money into housing, making it the cornerstone of their economy. Prices skyrocketed as households and speculative investors leveraged themselves to the hilt. This wealth effect spawned further borrowing and spending. But constantly rising home values do not constitute productive activity or genuine economic expansion. Housing merely changed hands for higher and higher sums, fueling an illusion of wealth. Mortgages doubled over 10 years, but their actual capacity to service them rested on unsustainably low rates. Now, with rates normalizing higher, the facade has come crashing down. Millions could no longer shoulder the drastic hikes in mortgage payments after years of overextending. Some face foreclosure, while younger Canadians find home ownership permanently out of reach now. And it's not just Canadian households that took on too much debt either. All levels of government did too. This further fueled the consumption frenzy, absent underlying fundamentals to support it. Federal and provincial debt has exactly doubled over 15 years to a staggering $2.1 trillion. Defense spending, social programs, infrastructure projects, pandemic response measures, all funded through borrowed money rather than taxes. While some programs proved worthwhile for citizens, we enjoy benefits today that future generations must repay with interest. All this public and private spending risked higher inflation down the road, an outcome many experts warned of but went unheeded. That painful day of reckoning has unfortunately arrived. Now, the inflation tax makes goods much more expensive for everyday Canadians dealing with maxed-out budgets already. Just as higher interest costs flowed through to tenants via skyrocketing rents, inflated consumer prices now erode people's incomes and savings further. Impact across the economy. The compounded impact of astronomical household debt levels and runaway inflation proves devastating. Canadians now labor under the highest household debt burdens among G7 countries. They owe $2.9 trillion, mostly in mortgages. As rates aggressively reset higher, mortgage carrying costs have jumped by 30% nationally over the past year. The resulting financial stress on homeowners inevitably flows through to the rental market. With investors passing on their own inflated financing bills, rents have spiked 21% as well, squeezing those unable to save for a down payment. These affordability chokeholds stemming from entrenched inflation and interest rate risks not only impact housing costs, prices for other essential goods and services get pulled upward too. From the grocery store to the gas pump, Canadians have watched budgets strain further against the backdrop of stagnant wage growth. Disposable incomes for average families have started shrinking at some of the fastest clips on record. Consumer spending trends already show clear signs of slowing. With household savings rates plummeting as Canadians struggle to keep up, experts warn a painful recession still looms ahead. And immigration has further strained the Canadian economy. Immigration overload intensifies the crisis. For many years, Canada sustained 250,000 immigrants annually, but recent targets have shot up dramatically to over 400,000 newcomers in 2023. But by 2025, Canada will welcome over 500,000 immigrants per year. Additionally, foreign student ranks keep expanding, possibly hitting 900,000 in 2023. Coupled with temporary foreign workers too, Canada's population now grows by almost 3% per year, easily the fastest pace among G7 countries. Yet Canada's economy expands at just a fraction of this speed. With GDP up just 0.5% in the past year, GDP per capita has actually dropped 2.5%. No wonder it feels like recession already for so many. Their economic capacity can simply not expand fast enough to properly integrate this volume of new permanent and temporary residents. Despite Canada's labor shortages in certain sectors, they lack adequate and affordable housing supply for so many new families. The infrastructure and social services cannot scale this quickly either. Attempting such rapid population growth without proper systemic supports risks seriously reducing Canadians' overall quality of life and financial stability. Experts now openly state what many ordinary Canadians already know. Excessive immigration under present conditions makes affordability worse. Derek Holt, head of capital markets economics at Scotiabank, observes that the meteoric rise in immigration in the past few years, unmatched by housing supply growth, directly pushes rents and home prices up across many urban centers. It also intensifies inflationary strains on goods, services, and labor costs economy-wide, at a time Canadians feel pinched already. Holt also notes that the jumps in prices for air travel, recreation, and transportation likely result partially from rapid population influxes rather than just crude oil dynamics or pent-up post-lockdown demand. Canada's infrastructure, housing stock, and public services simply cannot absorb this unprecedented surge of new consumers without generating massive cost-push inflation and chronic shortages. How has the government responded to such criticism? Government remains committed to mass immigration rather than addressing legitimate public concerns over eroding living standards. The immigration minister touts international students as a lucrative asset and credits them for being the future of this country. She pledges to ensure provinces supply adequate housing, a vague assurance at best, that ignores glaring unaffordability trends. Prioritizing international student revenue ahead of housing availability perfectly illustrates the government's stubborn refusal to meaningfully reform bloated immigration targets. They seem unwilling to even marginally temper intake levels to relieve intense price pressures. Ideological vision overrides economic and social realities. Just as unlikely is any serious effort to curb deficit spending either. Ottawa depends on the support of the left-leaning NDP, which opposes fiscal restraint. Even modest cutbacks to booming social programs would generate vigorous political backlash. The hard truth is that the Trudeau Liberals have little motivation to tackle the cost of living crisis through reduced immigration or spending cuts, despite economists' sound advice. It contradicts their political interests and vision for Canada's future. After steering Canada into a debt trap for years while income stagnated, the leadership now seems bereft of solutions as the economic squeeze takes hold. Canada's economy faces decline on multiple fronts simultaneously, constrained by heavy debt burdens, aging demographics, uncompetitive business taxes, and declining productivity, and more. It constitutes a very concerning long-term outlook. Private sector investment continues fleeing amid deteriorating prospects. Healthcare capacity diminishes right when more aging citizens will need those services. Younger generations feel understandably discouraged about their financial futures. With living standards eroding daily, conservative political parties seem poised for a resurgence. The policy proposals put forth speak to Canadians' present-day household budget anxieties from inflation far more directly than Liberals' grand visions around climate change, inclusion, diversity, and global migration. Practical, immediate pocketbook worries currently dominate public opinion rather than abstract social ideals. Whether Conservatives can repair the damage remains uncertain if elected. But with household finances under intense pressure, Canadians are clearly clamoring for different policy approaches and economic stewardship. In summary, years of debt-fueled growth without matching economic productivity has caught up with Canada. Declining living standards, crushed under the highest personal debt loads among G7 countries, leave many citizens barely managing month to month as costs continue rising faster than incomes. While the Bank of Canada tries restoring inflation to target by raising rates, a staggering 53% of Canadian households risk insolvency by not qualifying to absorb further increases. Mortgage and rent payments already siphon huge shares of take-home pay. Despite economists' repeated warnings on immigration's influence on housing affordability, the government refuses to meaningfully moderate aggressive growth targets. With real per capita GDP falling, Canada's economy cannot expand fast enough to welcome over 500,000 newcomers annually without intensifying inflation and cost of living strains. After years of inaction under Liberal government, the country nears an inflection point. With unaffordability reaching new extremes, Canadians demand solutions from leadership. As more Canadians get caught in the vice grip of rising prices, the calls for government intervention grow. Share your personal stories in the comments below. How are you surviving in this economy? Click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss our latest videos.